We have a fairly busy class today, actually, so I'm going to try to get right into it, and we might just be taking some short breaks today because I really want to get through all this stuff. But so first, if you haven't sent me your Jess Westerly questions, email them to me if you haven't done it, but I think maybe at this point I have everybody's. But let's go ahead and get into it. I guess just first, real quick. I mean, what did people think? Did people identify with her situation? Smart, bright, well trained, had great ideas, analytics, supported by good facts, buying in from her bosses, told good go forwards, and then she sends this email and it backfires on her pretty badly. Has anybody ever been in a position like that? Yeah, I think it's your classic rookie mistake, basically, and I think it's one of those ones where she probably didn't even realize that she had done anything wrong. I mean, she thought it was well founded with facts and data and supported, so it was probably a big surprise and a big shock to her that she got so much negative pushback. I like this case a lot because, to me, this is a typical, and these things come from reality. So, I mean, there was probably a situation that was very similar to this that the author knew about, and that's how they crafted these stories. I mean, I can see it. MBA students, smart, analytical, new at a job, want to make an impression, want to make a splash, sitting up in kind of a corporate office, away from the field, away from the sales force, away from the manufacturing, sends this email, and then all these old timers who've been there, done that, been successful, just think, no way. So, I mean, I can identify with this. I haven't had quite this situation, but I definitely, it spoke to me that, and I mentioned this last week, I think this is the big pitfall. I think this is what MBA students tend to really get wrong. This is that empirical, analytical framework that people listen to facts, listen to arguments, and then change their behavior. And I have found that not to be true. Yes, Diana?
Well, and she had success with the strategy at the previous job, and I think people tend to be lazy. And so if you have a strategy that worked and you've already done, used the brain power, you can just try to reuse the same stuff.
Yep.
So she just thought it was going to work again.
Yep. Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, Jason.
I know we'll dive into the case and the culture and how she misinterpreted or failed to act on some of it, but to me, she ran her idea by Tim Roeder, her boss, and he's more tenured with the company. I was really surprised that he basically approved her methodology of just sending out an email blindly.
Yeah.
Instead of having some sort of implementation plan and developing relationships.
You'd like to think that guy would have warned her to say, ooh, before you do this, you need to do a few other things. But I mean, I think that was part of the essential background of the case, was that she thought she had upper management support.
Right.
Yeah, Kevin.
Speaking of relationships, it's interesting, at the beginning of the case, they go through, and there's a pretty long excerpt on how she noticed the importance of building relationships, and then does the exact opposite.
Yeah, exactly. Good. All right. Well, I don't want to go into this too much because I'm going to actually write a response to all of you on your homework. So I think I'll clarify a lot of this, but I want to go through it just a little bit. So this is the key, right? Why didn't she spend more time building relationships? She obviously spent a lot of time on her analysis and her crunching of the numbers and her getting the market straight, but
I think that sometimes people are worried that if you ask a certain person, they might have the answer that makes what you think is a great idea not a great idea anymore. And so people don't seek out a different opinion for that very reason, because it might be, maybe it's not as good an idea, and so if you just avoid that path, and especially, I think she focused more on the relationships above than the relationships of the people who would be impacted by the change.
Right. Yeah, Vikram.
And somehow I think, you know, leaders take things for granted. That I'm at this position, if I say something, it will be done. And which in practically doesn't happen.
Yes, although that brings up a really good point.
She had no authority.
Right. Was she a leader?
No, her role had no authority over the salespeople.
Yeah.
Not even just newcomer.
Does anybody work in a, like, what I call a matrix organization? Yeah. I mean, this is the classic dilemma, is that your department works very closely with whoever, but the reporting lines are separate. So then you just depend upon those social relationships and this loose teamwork concept in order to get things done. If you really have to escalate something, it probably has to go up 2 levels, across, they fight, and then it comes back down, and by the time, you know, it's hopeless. I mean, you really have to develop these relationships when you work for that type of company. Duncan?
I guess the other thing that I thought of was just like the hubris of data. It's like, you know, I've looked at the numbers, and the numbers tell me this is what we're going to do. Well, I guess great in a classroom, but
Yeah.
not how the world works.
Yeah, her analysis seemed very academic, you know, because some of the feedback she got from these RSDs or some of these field people were, you ought to come call on these customers and then you'll find out how easy that'll be. You know, that's the real world. She was lacking, her analysis wasn't grounded in the real world. Yeah. So why did her first attempt to fail? I mean, I think we just went through it. You know, she was a little bit too hasty. She hadn't done some of the pre-work that we would prescribe for someone to do. You know, of course, hindsight's 20/20, but I think we can all agree that this case is trying to point you guys in the direction to say that she should have had more meetings, more conferences. She should have identified the influencers or the key stakeholders, the people who this change would have affected. She should have solicited their support, or at least gotten some feedback. You know, there was a little bit of talk about these younger salespeople, how they were not in favor of this because in order to get these software plans customized, they needed to coordinate with this engineering department, and the young salespeople didn't have those relationships, so they felt uncomfortable. So she should have figured that out beforehand. So there was a lot of stuff that she didn't do. But about the culture, how would we describe this company? Kaufmann GmbH, as they would say in Germany, I guess. How would you describe the culture?
I thought they were pretty flexible, actually, because some of the different products they'd come up with, they had a new problem that came up, they very quickly mobilized, had a solution made for it. And as you just said, they're young, and I guess younger folks are a little bit more eager or accepting of change like that. So I said yes.
But was it strong? Strong culture?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Strong culture. Some characteristics. Flexible, service-oriented, relationship-oriented, collaborative.
Mutual respect, I think, is a big one for them.
Not incentive-driven.
Yeah, I mean, again, so this is a case, but they said, oh, money is not a motivating factor. They've obviously never met salespeople, but that they were trying to make a point that what they really prized was, I think they said, number 1, solving problems for customers, and number 2, I don't know, developing new products or something. No, a distant third was monetary. Very male-oriented, German. I think they described her as a double minority, right? A non-German female. I thought that was funny, a double minority. But so, I mean, that will probably play into this. Not hierarchical, right? They said it was like someone described it as, you know, people were shocked when they joined the company at how flat the organization is. So, you know, all those things are elements that she should have diagnosed a little bit better before she went forward. So we'll kind of go into this a little bit. So, but one thing that I wanted to bring up, it wasn't talked about so much in the case, and I didn't assign any readings for it. Last time I taught this class, we had a bit of a module on this, what we call power. It didn't to me, it didn't make sense to take the time to do that, but I think you guys will all appreciate this, and you'll understand it inherently. So there's a couple of, in an academic sense, there's a couple of sources of power that people can derive in an organization. Number one, it's pretty obvious, right? Position. If you're the president, if you're the CEO, if you're the boss, if you're the director, if you're whomever, if your title and your position is of such nature, then of course you have some natural inherent power. A second one, which is kind of funny, but charisma, of course. If you're charming, if you're likable, if you're someone who can develop good relationships with, people want to be around, people want to work for, people want to join their team. Charisma is very, very powerful. Of course, relationships, right? If you and a coworker are known to be really tight on something and aligned on something, if someone needs to win one of you over, they know that they really have to win both of you over. There's power in numbers. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what a union does, right? A union creates a network of relationships that then act as one. So there's a lot of course, power in relationships. Information, right? If you possess information that's needed, if you're a software engineer and you know how to program an app and you're a salesperson meeting with a customer and this customer wants something, you know you need to go back to the sales engineer. That sales engineer has a lot of power. You need them to do something for you or share something with you. So that's obviously a source of power. A little bit the same, expertise. Of course, punishment. It goes a little bit with the one about position, but if you are a person who can implement sanctions on someone if they don't do what they're asked to do, that of course gives you power, and vice versa, of course, reward, sort of the same thing. So, Jess Westerly, did she have position of power, Brian? No. Did she have power of charisma? Not that we know of. What about relationships? No. Information? Yes. Okay, she did. She had a wealth of information. So that's why people didn't just completely ignore her. I mean, she was presenting something. Expertise, new to the company, nobody really knew her. Punishment, reward. So in one sense, she really lacked power to implement any sort of a change. Now, I would argue that even if somebody possessed all of those things, that email still wouldn't have worked, right? You know, if Tim Roeder had sent it out, a few more people would have sort of maybe been nice about it, but at the same time, eventually they would have come back to him and said, we don't think this makes sense. But for an outsider who was new, who didn't have any personal relationships, a bad recipe on this board behind me. And one of the quotes that I think goes really well with this case is this one from Michael Beer. And he says, the ease or difficulty of implementing a proposed change is a function of how great the level of dissatisfaction is with the status quo, how clear and compelling the vision and proposals are for change, and the effectiveness of the change implementation process. So it's kind of a three-step thing, right? How dissatisfied are people? How clear is the explanation of what the future could look like? And then once you get 1 and 2, how effective is your change process? Well, right here, for Jess Westerly and Kaufman, how dissatisfied were these people with the current status quo?
They weren't at all.
Not at all. They had the best year ever. Record sales, record profits.
Best in class.
Best in class. So.
And there was a bunch of SAP refugees who had been in the organization targeting large customers.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Because they saw a niche that was unfulfilled and started a company to fill that niche. And she's coming in and saying, that's great, fellas, but what you really want to do is compete against SAP.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, now that's not to say that the reality of the situation, you know, the perception could be different, right? I mean, if Jess or Tim or the other guy, you know, if they had some piece of knowledge that said, oh, SAP is going to spin off their middle market group and they're going to compete our pants off, now suddenly, oh, maybe we do need to do it. But without that sort of information to the average sales engineer or sales consultant, why are we thinking about changing this? This doesn't make sense to me. So one can appreciate that there's a lot of recipe components into this that would not lead to easy adoption from the people. So my question is to you guys is, what should she have done? I think we talked about it. Or, what should she do now? She gets a second chance. She goes to see Tim. He says, take a couple months. We're going to reboot this. You get to hit the restart button. So we've touched on it, but what should she do now?
Bring some of the groups in that this change is going to impact, bring them into the conversation, solicit their feedback, actually act on the things that she observed in orientation, show mutual respect, show that she respects their work and expertise, and collaborate with them to get, and actually incorporate their feedback into her proposal. Because she, not only will she get the buy-in, but it'll help her implement the change, but she'll probably get some decent ideas too. She can actually refine it and be even more successful.
Yeah. She needs to find some champions in the field as well, and then once they get buy-in, then communicate out again, celebrate small wins.
So who do you think they should be? Like, who would the, you said bring in some of these people. You said find who do you think would be the most target-rich group that we should focus on?
If there's a sales lead group, if she could find that group and go to the territories that would have the highest yield and even the lowest yield, so she could show that she went to both for feedback. The highest yield were more likely to be her champions, but she could show that she spent time in every type of territory.
The product design team too. To make sure that they're there to support the sales team's needs once they change their call pattern.
Yeah, I mean, I have a guess that if she got a couple of these key salespeople or these RSDs and she proposed this and convinced them of it, I think the first thing they would say is, hey, this is you're having us migrate toward a more complex package here. We need these sales engineers to be on board with this too, because now we're going to come at them with longer development timelines and I think it's fewer customers but more complex development. So can we, Jess, are you going to have the same meeting with them? Are you going to get them on board? I mean, convincing us is one thing, but if you don't convince them, then we're just going to get backed up. So she needs to bring them together. Yeah, so these are my answers. Pre-work. Get the buy-in from these RSDs and find a coalition of field consultants and at least gauge their opposition, right? Really get them to explain to her why they don't like the idea. But absolutely, she needs to start soliciting feedback from the people who this is going to affect. I think you used the word powerful coalition. And again, now the word urgency comes up. Got to instill some urgency. Where does this urgency come from? Well, that's to be debated. Maybe it's just not quite there. But, I think the reality is this organization seems to be a bit more of that empirical, analytical type of organization. German men probably don't need a whole lot of re-educate, I know, whatever they were called. They probably deal in facts. They probably deal in analytics a little bit more. But still, there has to be some sort of dissatisfaction with the future state. This was my idea. She should go on some sales calls like that field rep said. Go out, meet these customers, find out exactly what these consultants do, hear from the customer's mouth what they appreciate. Get people to know her name, face and a name. You heard that. Oh, I got to put a face and a name together. You get an email from some person you never met who's telling you to do something differently. You think, who the heck is this person? So she needs to be out there, be more visible. Visible leadership, they would call that. Get out there and shake hands and meet some people. And test the validity of her change plan. Seek out the people who are going to be opponents, right? That's one of the smartest things you can do is figure out who's going to oppose the plan and then try to win them over. If you can win over the real naysayers, you've gone a long way toward helping yourself out. What do you guys think about having a kickoff meeting?
Yeah, and invite the leadership from the different functions too. So Klaus, or this, I think the sales team.
Yeah, Klaus, someone,
so get them in the room and show that they're behind the idea too. Then that'll disseminate down through their organizations.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you go out in the field. So I would say you got to do all this first. Sometimes people say, oh, let's do this first. We'll launch this project. We'll launch this initiative. Let's have a kickoff meeting. Well, if you do that before this, people will walk in. You know, if you remember back on that very first presentation where the guy was standing on the platform and said change, and someone said, oh, my job's gone, and someone else said, oh, I need to do my laundry. I mean, people, you know, you need to do a little bit of work first. But, and especially if you're getting opposition, then get Klaus and get Tim and get upper management on board, have this kickoff meeting and have them say, hey, we support this. We need you guys to support this. So, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I said she's got to have the burning platform and senior management standing there with gasoline and torches. I mean, it's a real, because we've got a company that, by all appearances, is doing very well.
Yep.
And she's coming in and saying, do it differently.
Yep.
And unless there's some real sense of urgency,
right.
It's a hell of a sale.
It is. And to be honest with you, we don't draw a conclusion whether her idea is right or not. It might not be right. It may not be the right move for this company. They seem to have their market niche. They're very successful. They step it up a notch. They're going to start getting head-to-head on with Oracle and SAP and the likes. So, you know, this case does not ask us to grade her recommendation. But if someone were to say to me, hey, I just think they absolutely should not do this, I don't think I could argue with you. I thought it was interesting that someone mentioned that you know, there are a few people in the company who do sell to these class 1 and 2 big accounts. It would make a lot of sense for her to talk with them and understand what all goes into it. If we were to change our game and start allocating 30% of our sales to these accounts, what are the pitfalls that we need to worry about? So getting some market intelligence from those guys would be important. And then, as maybe Jason was saying, we got to link these consultants with the development people in Heidelberg. It's a matrix organization. Sales and engineering do not report to the same person. So it's dependent on this informal networks they kept referring to, the informal relationships, these social connections. You know, if I was one of these field people, I would probably try to spend a lot of time in Heidelberg and really buddy-buddy with some of these folks. I mean, has anybody ever worked in a company where you were really dependent on a certain department and just, you know, whether it was IT, you know, because you just, anytime your computer would go down, you really kiss up to IT, or has anybody ever been?
Yeah, it happens in our field all the time. So we have electronic medical records. So when that system goes down, and we still have patients waiting, and they don't stop bringing the patient. They keep bringing the patient back. So the system is down. What I can do, and that brings a lot of frustration. And we try to complain to the IT department. Hey, can you please fix it as soon as possible?
Yeah.
But sometimes, you know, it doesn't work, and we have to wait for hours, and our frustration goes through the roof. And what they do is the alternative, which is not good either, is that do on paper.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
When I did my summer internship in between my business school years, I did an investment banking internship, and they were asking us to do a lot of these pitch books, you know, these sort of investment proposals. And this was back in, you know, the early 2000s, where nothing was really electronic. I mean, these were literally spiral-bounded pitch books that you had to give to the clients. And you can imagine, as a summer intern, we were last in priority, but we had to go to the print shop to get these things made up and put the plastic cover and that, you know, that little spiral spine, that like a super annoying thing with the claws that if one or two get out, it's like impossible to, you know, we had to go to the print shop. And, you know, someone told me, hey, look, they're going to deprioritize you like crazy. So one of the other guys said, bring those guys a six-pack of beer and some pizza every so often, and that's what I started doing. And sure enough, if I needed something, they would do it for me. I was literally bribing these guys with beer and pizza. But you know, that's the way sometimes things get done in companies. There's no authority. I had no authority over them. I had to talk about power. I had zero power. Summer intern, they knew I'd be gone in 2 months anyway. And but you know, you can find ways to build those relationships. Yeah, and then another thing we always talk about is trying to align these internal barriers. There is a lot of development work, so they need to be consistent with this company culture of being very collegial, a lot of collaboration. You know, they need to be careful that this new frontier doesn't start making things too formal, because they seem to push back against that. So you need to keep that company culture in mind. And then, of course, one question is, does she start broad or does she start narrow? Does she start with the whole company all at once across all regions, or does she say, hey, maybe I'm not sure about this, so let's start with Asia. Asia's not really our key market, so let's try that. Or maybe Asia's the wrong one. Maybe North America. Let's try with North America, or Europe. Hey, let's start at home, and then we'll go out to the satellites later. But either way, one recommendation always in these things is start with a pilot program. If you screw it up, you can learn some lessons and you can fix it, and then when you roll it out over a bigger group, you're not embarrassing yourself or killing the golden goose. So maybe sometimes it's better, if you have time on your side, start small. And then, of course, we always say you should report on your successes, and she needs to get on the agenda, right? Especially if she starts at a pilot, if she starts in Asia, starts in North America, starts calling on these class 1s and 2s, starts having success, she should get on the sales meeting or get on the operations meeting in Europe and get on the operations meeting in the other markets and say, hey, we've already started this and look what we've accomplished. That'll start to build the momentum and the enthusiasm. So again, I think we've talked about a lot of these things before, but it's one thing just to say it on paper in an academic sense. It's another thing to actually think about what she would need to do in this hypothetical situation. So again, these are the things that you're going to see. The first week we read an article about why leadership change fails. This author had something he called the critical path. You're going to read a book next week about what killed change. You're going to start to see a very common theme about what are the elements that often appear in successful programs. It's this urgency, it's clarity of vision, it's communication, it's find this guiding coalition or task force, aligning processes, generating wins and celebrations, documenting milestones. You're going to start seeing that again and again and again. But I don't want you to leave this class just with this. I want you to be able to start really saying, okay, what do I need to do to create that sense of urgency?
One question I have, so in this case, she got approval from her manager, pitched it to upper management, had solid numbers, and they said move forward.
Yeah.
Something that I always have is managers always ask, what do you need from me?
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like what she needed was time then to go back and do research on the people aspect versus the number aspect.
Sure.
So when her manager is asking for updates on this change project, what update should she give besides, oh, I'm market walking, oh, I'm planning a fun kickoff meeting for later? It just doesn't, that's always my concern, is you have the momentum once you get approval from your manager, so how do you communicate back where you are in the process?
Well, I mean, I think she needs to tell them that she's facing resistance, and that if your question is maybe before, like in your hypothetical situation, she didn't send that email and didn't get all that pushback,
correct,
then I think she would need to convince her bosses that as a relatively new person, a key step in this process is for her to get herself out there, get herself more known, start to develop these relationships. If you've ever been to starting a new job, my bosses always encourage me. They said, hey, get out in the field. First thing, like literally week 1, sign your papers, now get out in the field, start meeting these people. So I'd like to think that they would not discourage her from that. But of course, you can't take 9 months.
right?
Maybe it'd be an accelerated plan, but could she do a lot of this in 4 weeks? Be a lot of travel. 6 weeks, maybe. But I think that I think a reasonable boss would say, okay, hey, take 6 weeks, go meet these people, go visit customers, go to these other offices, and start to build that relationship. I think that'd be fair. I think. So, anyway, I'll come back to you all on your papers and try to instill a little bit of this and try to guide you in the thought process. But I thought this was a really good case, that I think this is a very prototypical example of a smart, motivated, young professional person who had good ideas, but just went about it maybe the wrong way and got feedback. I mean, I think Ivy was mentioning something last week about that. She went in full head of steam and got pretty negative feedback from her colleagues. I think there's a lot of stories like this, so I thought this was a good case for everybody to do. Okay, next was the case, or the article on interpersonal influence, because what we're going to try to transition a little bit into is once you're on this change management process, how do we start influencing people, especially people who are resistant to change? If people were on board with your ideas, then you really wouldn't need to do a lot of persuasion or a lot of influence. But I think what you're going to find is, and as Jess found, there's a lot of pushback on change. We learned in week 1 that even when faced with real facts about your health, people are resistant to change. So there's no doubt that successful change managers need to have some good skills when it comes to influencing people. So the article came from this book. This is a book that I had to read way back when. I really liked it. It's quite long, but it's not really that heavy because he does go into a lot of examples. So there's a chapter on liking, and it goes through all this different parts about liking, and there's a chapter on authority, and it goes through all the different parts of authority. But sounds like you guys have enough reading to do in other classes and in this class too that I did not want to give you the entire book. So I found this article, and I think the article did a pretty good job of summarizing some of these concepts. So reciprocation was one of the 6 principles of influence. Can someone share with the class what reciprocation means in this context? Sarah.
In the scenarios that he does, he talks about how if you do a gesture for someone else, we're automatically inclined. It's the same reason why if you go to a potluck, you can't eat anything unless you brought something for the potluck. It's like that same mentality of, here's a free sample, buy something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think credit card companies do that sort of thing all the time, right? They have little kiosks and they say, hey, come get a t-shirt or come get a, something, and then you almost feel obligated to take the credit card, or the people that mail you your name with those Christmas labels, those return labels, but then they want a $15 donation to Salvation Army or Red Cross, so then you feel like, oh, they sent me this, like, I feel bad if I keep it, I don't pay them, I'm almost like stealing, so that's the principle of reciprocation. But in a business sense or in an organizational sense, this is like just favors. If you do somebody a favor, hey, look, I know you need this right now, I'll hook you up, but it implicitly means that later on I might ask you for a favor, and then of course, if someone's done a favor for you and then they come asking, I mean, what kind of jerk are you then if you don't give them a favor back, right? That's just human nature. If someone does something nice for you, you feel like you need to give it back to them. So, yeah, people feel indebted to those who do something for them or give them a gift. Yeah, it can be simple as kindness. If you're kind to somebody, they'll be kind back to you. Social proof. This is an interesting one. Social proof. What did that mean in the context of this book? Or this article? Duncan.
We measure what we think is good based on the reaction of those around.
Yeah.
The example he gave about the towels being reused, that was kind of funny.
Yeah.
Because people didn't care about donations, they didn't care about going green. Well, they did, but not as much about as most guests reuse their towels. So you should do.
Yeah, I mean, this is peer pressure. Mm-hmm. If everyone else is doing it, and you sort of look around and go, oh, then it must be okay, right? I mean, have you got, I'm just trying to think about like in a business school setting. I'm not sure about how it is here, and you guys aren't here during the day, but at least when I was in business school, there was always free lunch somewhere. There was a club or a meeting or something. There was always free lunch, but it was for a specific group. It was the private equity club was having a lunch, and then they would just lay out, and then everyone would sort of eyeball it, and then someone like, oh man, I'm so hungry, I'd love to get one of those slices of pizza or whatever. And then once like one person walked up there who probably wasn't in the group and just grabbed one, everyone was like, oh, game on, like that guy did it, like I can do it now. I mean, you just need one other person to do it, and then you're in. And social proof in an organizational setting, this is a little bit like that discussion last week about that framework for change, the normative re-educative, I think it was, where people are social beings, and if they start to see some group of people act a certain way, you want to fall in line and do it too. So you look to others for validation. In this movie we're going to watch in a little bit, one of the early scenes is they call for a vote. And they say, okay, all in favor, say aye. And so 3 or 4 hands go up right away, and then you see a couple other people, they look around, and then they sort of raise their hand. That's a classic example of this. They really weren't sure where they stood. They saw a bunch of strong-willed people stick their hand up, and they kind of go. So that's social proof. Commitment and consistency.
You're driven, if you say you're going to do something, you're much more likely to actually do it if it's been displayed amongst other people, or verbally you tell somebody to do something, you have a much higher chance of actually doing it.
Yep, exactly. Anyone else?
They say in the book that if you write something down, you're like 40% more likely to do it, but the second you tell someone else, it doubles to 80%.
Yeah.
And it's all about the other individual.
Yeah, I mean, in our society, we value, or maybe the other way is we don't value people who are erratic. We don't like erratic behavior. We don't like people who are inconsistent. So a valuable behavior that you can display is this consistency. And that's innate in us too. So that's why they really suggest that you get someone to promise to help you. So I think in the book they recommend that if you go to if you find some very bureaucratic situation, I think that maybe they use the DMV. So you go to the DMV, you've got a problem, your driver's license has expired, but you need it immediately, or something happens, and you go walk up to the counter and you ask the person behind the counter, and they give you some snot answer, go away or something. If you can somehow say, sir or ma'am, can you help me? If you can get them just to say, okay, yes. Just that alone, just getting them to say, yes, I can help you, means 40% chance or 50% chance more that they'll actually help you, because now they verbally said, yes, I'll help you. If they've never said that, then somehow they can retreat behind, I can't do it. But once they say, yes, I can help you, you've got them. Because then for them to say, no, I can't, that would be an inconsistent behavior, and they don't want to do that.
Does that work for speeding tickets?
Sure, good.
So it's interesting to say the older we get, the more we value consistency. And I have seen, so when I was taking care of patients who are young patient population, and if I'm out, they are ready to see any physician. But with my geriatric patient population, they only want to see me. If I'm not in office, they will cancel appointment. And when I tell them, they are more motivated to take, to more adherence to their medications.
Yeah.
And someone else, let's say, go to the ER,
yeah,
most likely they're not going to take that. So I think the consistency does increase with the age.
Yeah, and for me, this is a little bit more about trust. I can think of certainly if I have a big project that's due, or if my boss calls me and says I need some data today, and I'm traveling and I can't do it, there's about 4 people in my office I could call, but I'm going to call the one who I've depended on before and has always nailed the assignment, because that's a consistent pattern of delivering on time. I've got another person who arguably is a more intelligent person, but he's all up and down. Sometimes he delivers, sometimes he flakes out. So, for me, in terms of persuasion, in terms of, that guy would have much more persuasion over me because he has delivered consistently. So I will value that when he comes to me and needs something from me, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. So it's just an inherent behavior trait that our society really appreciates. Yeah. Liking. This one's pretty easy, right? It's easier to be persuaded by someone who you like. Some of this gets back to this charismatic leadership. If you like the leader, if he or she is a charming, charismatic person, you like them, you're more likely to do what they ask. If the person's a real jerko, you know, you might just not want to do it just to make a point that I don't want to help people who are jerks. So, I think that one's pretty obvious. Authority. Well, on the one hand, this one's interesting because, of course, if someone's in a position of authority, they're going to have a better chance of persuading you. But I thought what was interesting was that the article points out and the book points out that even if the authority is illegitimate, we still buy into it. So, I mean, I think the classic, I have to admit I didn't read the article again, so if I'm going to say something that was in the article, I apologize. But I mean, I think the classic case is there was a study that was done maybe back in the 60s, Stanford. They had a bunch of students supposedly delivering an electric shock to someone in the room, but they couldn't see them. They could only hear the screams. And they had these grad students telling them, turn up the knob, give them more power. And then at a certain point, the people pushing the button went, like, I think I'm hurting them. Like, I don't want to do it. But when they had the same students wear like a white lab coat, they cranked it up without question because just that white lab coat made the button pusher think that they were an authority figure. So of course, well, this person's saying I should do it. So even, you know, and I think there was another case where they had people role play prison guards, right? And just it went apeshit. I mean, just people went, you know, people start beating each other, and people just absorbed the role playing too much, and so the guards were acting like guards and had this authority. And so it's just kind of funny how in our society we yearn and thirst for someone to tell us what to do, more or less. And so that one's an interesting one too. So you can build persuasion by getting this authority, even if you don't have the formal title. If you can somehow make yourself the authoritative figure. Maybe it's the way you dress. Maybe it's you become an expert on a certain subject area. Yeah.
A lot of times you notice people doing that when they say, so-and-so, someone with authority, told me to reach out to you or told me to tell you to do whatever.
Yeah.
That's by extension.
You're borrowing authority.
That's right.
Yeah. That's great. Absolutely.
I think the lady did it in the memo that she sent to. I think she said,
she did.
Tim, so-and-so asked me to forward this message to you.
You're right. She did. I hadn't thought of that, but you're exactly right. Yep.
We do that a lot in sales too. You meet somebody at a show, a conference, whatever. You use their name to basically legitimize the fact that why I'm reaching out.
Yeah.
So-and-so said that you'd be a great person to talk to about this.
And I mean, and I'll tell you, you know, you guys or any of us, if you spent 2 hours researching something, you could likely become the expert in your company on it. That's how easy it is. So for example, in my company, China is a big problem. China's become this somewhat of a bad apple in the commodities area. They basically are the world's biggest consumer and producer of everything. Steel, copper, aluminum, magnesium, everything. And I remember a couple years ago, someone said to me, hey, what do we know about China? And I said, I don't know anything about China. And so then I literally went on Google, and 2 hours later I walked in and said, well, here's what I've learned. And then from that moment on, I became the China expert. And still to this day, I am the China expert in my company. Because 8 years ago, I spent 2 hours on Google and read a couple Wikipedia things on China. I mean, that's really all it takes. And by doing that, you start gaining authority. You're the expert. You're the authoritative person on the subject matter. So it's pretty easy, actually, to gain some authority. And then, of course, scarcity. What was the example they used in the article on scarcity?
Coke and New Coke.
Coke and New Coke. Okay. That one's a little bit weird.
You want what you can't have, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all about sort of luxury products, right? It's pricing them to.
Yeah, but I think it's much more simple than that. I mean, it's you get an email saying today only 20% off any item in the store. I had no interest in buying a new suit today, but 20% off today only. Well, I was maybe going to do it in the next couple of months, so okay, I'll just do it now. I'm I'm sure there'll be a 20% coupon next week and the next week. But it's just this thought that, hey, this deal won't exist tomorrow. I need to jump on it. Or did anybody go see the circus this year? Ringling Brothers Circus? This was the last year, right?
This weekend was last
right, the last show up in New York. But when it came through Richmond, last ever Ringling Brothers Circus. I guarantee you they got a lot more people than they got last year, because people just figured, oh, I'll go see the circus sometime. But this was the last chance. So scarcity, gotta go see the circus. So I think this one also, people can really understand that if it's rare, the more valuable it becomes. So did you guys like this article? Was this? I have a video which talks about the same thing that I think puts it the same way. But if you'll bear with me, there's ludicrous. Their audio? Nope. Why is there no audio?
Reality is for 60.
Okay, I guess there was no audio. Okay, it's coming.
Researchers have been studying the factors that influence us to say yes to the requests of others for over 60 years. And there can be no doubt that there's a science to how we are persuaded. And a lot of this science is surprising. When making a decision, it'd be nice to think that people consider all the available information in order to guide their thinking. But the reality is very often different. In the increasingly overloaded lives we lead, more than ever, we need shortcuts or rules of thumb to guide our decision making. My own research has identified just 6 of these shortcuts as universals that guide human behavior. They are reciprocity, scarcity, authority, consistency, liking, and consensus. Understanding these shortcuts and employing them in an ethical manner can significantly increase the chances that someone will be persuaded by your request. Let's take a closer look at each in turn.
So, the first universal principle of influence is reciprocity. Simply put, people are obliged to give back to others the form of behavior, gift, or service that they have received first. If a friend invites you to their party, there's an obligation for you to invite them to a future party you are hosting. If a colleague does you a favour, then you owe that colleague a favour. And in the context of a social obligation, people are more likely to say yes to those that they owe. One of the best demonstrations of the principle of reciprocation comes from a series of studies conducted in restaurants. So the last time you visit a restaurant, there's a good chance that the waiter or waitress will have given you a gift. Probably at about the same time that they bring your bill. A liqueur perhaps, or a fortune cookie, or perhaps a simple mint. So here's the question. Does the giving of a mint have any influence over how much tip you're going to leave them? Most people will say no, but that mint can make a surprising difference. In the study, giving diners a single mint at the end of their meal typically increased tips by around 3%. Interestingly, if the gift is doubled and 2 mints are provided, tips don't double. They quadruple, a 14% increase in tips. But perhaps most interestingly of all is the fact that if the waiter provides 1 mint, starts to walk away from the table, but pauses, turns back, and says, for you nice people, here's an extra mint, tips go through the roof. A 23% increase, influenced not by what was given, but how it was given. So the key to using the principle of reciprocation is to be the first to give and to ensure that what you give is personalized and unexpected.
The second universal principle of persuasion is scarcity. Simply put, people want more of those things they can have less of. when British Airways announced in 2003 that they would no longer be operating the twice-daily London-New York Concorde flight because it had become uneconomical to run. Sales the very next day took off. Notice that nothing had changed about the Concorde itself. It certainly didn't fly any faster, the service didn't suddenly get better, and the airfare didn't drop. It had simply become a scarce resource, and as a result, people wanted it more. So when it comes to effectively persuading others using the scarcity principle, the science is clear. It's not enough simply to tell people about the benefits they'll gain if they choose your products and services. You'll also need to point out what is unique about your proposition and what they stand to lose if they fail to consider your proposal.
Our third principle of influence is the principle of authority, the idea that people follow the lead of credible, knowledgeable experts. Physiotherapists, for example, are able to persuade more of their patients to comply with recommended exercise programs if they display their medical diplomas on the walls of their consulting rooms. People are more likely to give change for a parking meter to a complete stranger if that requester wears a uniform rather than casual clothes. What the science is telling us is that it's important to signal to others what makes you a credible, knowledgeable authority before you make your influence attempt. Of course, this can present problems. You can hardly go around telling potential customers how brilliant you are, but you can certainly arrange for someone to do it for you. And surprisingly, the science tells us that it doesn't seem to matter if the person who introduces you is not only connected to you, but also likely to prosper from the introduction themselves. One group of real estate agents were able to increase both the number of property appraisals and the number of subsequent contracts that they wrote by arranging for reception staff who answered customer inquiries to first mention their colleagues' credentials and expertise. So, customers interested in letting a property were told, lettings? Let me connect you with Sandra, who has over 15 years experience letting properties in this area. Customers who wanted more information about selling properties were told, speak to Peter, our head of sales. He has over 20 years experience selling properties. I'll put you through now. The impact of this expert introduction led to a 20% rise in the number of appointments and a 15% increase in the number of signed contracts. Not bad for a small change informed from persuasion science that was both ethical and costless to implement.
The next principle is consistency. People like to be consistent with the things they have previously said or done. Consistency is activated by looking for and asking for small initial commitments that can be made. In one famous set of studies, researchers found, rather unsurprisingly, that very few people would be willing to erect an unsightly wooden board on their front lawn to support a Drive Safely campaign in their neighborhood. However, in a similar neighborhood close by, 4 times as many homeowners indicated that they would be willing to erect this unsightly billboard. Why? Because 10 days previously, they had agreed to place a small postcard in the front window of their home that signaled their support for a Drive Safely campaign. That small card was the initial commitment that led to a 400% increase in a much bigger but still consistent change. So, when seeking to influence using the consistency principle, the detective of influence looks for voluntary, active, and public commitments, and ideally gets those commitments in writing. For example, one recent study reduced missed appointments at health centers by 18%, simply by asking the patients rather than the staff to write down appointment details on the future appointment card.
The fifth principle is the principle of liking. People prefer to say yes to those that they like. But what causes one person to like another? Persuasion science tells us that there are 3 important factors. We like people who are similar to us, we like people who pay us compliments, and we like people who cooperate with us towards mutual goals. as more and more of the interactions that we are having take place online, it might be worth asking whether these factors can be employed effectively in, let's say, online negotiations. In a series of negotiation studies carried out between MBA students at two well-known business schools, some groups were told, time is money, get straight down to business. In this group, around 55% were able to come to an agreement. A second group, however, were told, before you begin negotiating, exchange some personal information with each other. Identify a similarity you share in common, then begin negotiating. In this group, 90% of them were able to come to successful and agreeable outcomes that were typically worth 18% more to both parties. So to harness this powerful principle of liking, be sure to look for areas of similarity that you share with others and genuine compliments you could give before you get down to business.
The final principle is consensus. Especially when they are uncertain, people will look to the actions and behaviors of others to determine their own. You may have noticed that hotels often place a small card in bathrooms that attempt to persuade guests to reuse their towels and linen. Most do this by drawing a guest's attention to the benefits that reuse can have on environmental protection. It turns out that this is a pretty effective strategy, leading to around 35% compliance. But could there be an even more effective way? Well, it turns out that about 75% of people who check into a hotel for 4 nights or longer will reuse their towels at some point during their stay. So what would happen if we took a lesson from the principle of consensus and simply included that information on the cards and said that 75% of our guests reuse their towels at some time during their stay? So please do so as well. It turns out that when we do this, towel reuse rises by 26%. Now imagine the next time you stay in a hotel, you saw one of these signs. You picked it up and you read the following message. 75% of people who have stayed in this room have reused their towel. What would you think? Well, here's what you might think. I hope they're not the same towels. And like most people, you probably think that this sign will have no influence on your behavior whatsoever. But it turns out that changing just a few words on a sign to honestly point out what comparable previous guests have done was the single most effective message, leading to a 33% increase in reuse. So, the science is telling us that rather than relying on our own ability to persuade others, we can point to what many others are already doing, especially many similar others.
So there we have it, 6 scientifically validated principles of persuasion that provide for small, practical, often costless changes that can lead to big differences in your ability to influence and persuade others in an entirely ethical way. They are secrets from the science of persuasion.
Okay. All right. Let's take a 10-minute break. 7:25, we'll come back.